This right here, one of three in fact, is the Dyson DC14 All Floors. Dyson's second mainstream upright here in the United States, released in 2004. And the Dyson DC14, of course there's a train going by the second I start this. But the Dyson DC14 is very special because it recently has hit 2 anniversaries, especially on this channel. The first and most obvious anniversary is the 20-year anniversary since its release back in 2004. And the second is the 6-year anniversary since my first review of the DC14, which was my first ever review on any vacuum on this channel alongside the Bissell Power Force. Now that one was the animal version, which I no longer own. But I do currently own 3 different models of DC14s, as well as 3 DC14 All Floors SKUs. The All Floors is the one I have the most often, and along with the animal, it's going to be the most common that you're going to find out there. Now, the only difference between the DC14 colorways is simply the color itself and the attachment package. This is the DC14 All Floors, which is the bare bones unit. The DC14 Low Reach is identical to the standard DC14, only it came with the Low Reach floor tool included in the box. The DC14 Animal included the Low Reach floor tool, the turbo brush, and the Zorb carpet maintenance powder kit, along with some other little goodies related to that. Now, of course, there's many other packages on top of that. There's the complete version, which comes with everything, which I'm trying to get my hands on because that all silver with purple accent look is very nice. And I guess we'll briefly touch on that one little thing. The DC14 is my favorite Dyson of all time, not objectively in terms of cleaning or the one that I would pick, but in terms of nostalgia and in terms of the sheer amount of awesome colors the DC14 comes in. It's quite nice. Obviously, Dyson doesn't do that anymore, but every color of the DC14 looks fantastic. Now, of course, my favorite color is the DC14 Full Access, also known as the HSN exclusive DC14, also known as the Best Buy exclusive, also known as the Nebraska Furniture Mart exclusive. Silver, orange, and blue are my 3 favorite colors, and this has all of that. But because of how much I like this one will actually get a separate video done on it as well, despite the fact they're effectively the same machines. And here's the Low Reach as well, one I've had for many years, and unfortunately this is one of the first gen DC14s that actually is 20 years old, but the problem is that it does have some issues with plastic fading. As we can see, a lot of the plastic does have kind of a green tinge to it, and it's a bit gross, and unfortunately if you're not careful, these things can in fact go brittle. So you want to be very careful with these, and you don't want to store them in the sun, although it's probably too little too late for a good chunk of them out there. DC14s also had a fun little quirk with them that you may have noticed. There's actually a separate filter duct. Now, on the Dyson DC07, this was where your filter was stored, and it also was that way on the Dyson DC33, as well as the DC27 and 28, even if those had a slightly different design. As we can see, the Dyson DC07 actually holds its filter down in this bottom filter casing, and that's where we have our premotor filter. Now, previously, prior to the Dyson DC07, oh no! Did I just mention that these Dysons go brittle? Oh, dang it. I wasn't planning on... Well, that was definitely unscripted. Oh, goodness. Well, so much for demonstrating that. I wonder if I can glue that. Anyways, so prior to the DC07, the DC14, or I should say, after the DC07, the DC14 decided to pay homage to the previous generation 10-digit lower DC04, which never came out in the States, but had a very similar filter setup. The DC04 had the 2 tools in a very identical position stored on the top of the cyclone assembly, and had a filter that was underneath a catch that you would lift up and access the premotor filter that way. The design is very similar, So Dyson decided to go back to this design on the DC14, but just with some improvements. On the DC14, when we go to remove the cyclone assembly, we can see it's identical to what we saw in the DC04, with the upholstery tool over here and the dusting brush over here, but instead we have a small lip that we pull up, and that allows us to access our pre-motor filter. Now, that airflow duct that you saw earlier on the DC07, on the original release of the DC14, still maintained that filter release door, but when you try to open it, it simply has a message in there saying this is an airflow duct, wash the filter as shown every 6 months, with an illustration of the cyclone assembly and how to access that filter. On later DC14s, because of them having issues with customers being confused about filters being there, they would remove that little release latch and instead have it held in by a screw. So that way people aren't trying to stuff filters in their Dysons where they're not supposed to go. Although it is worth noting, a DC07 filter won't fit in here anyways, despite what some have claimed, because there are tabs in the way and no proper spring to hold it in place. Although I'm sure if you're talented enough, you could probably stuff one in there and get double the filtration, although it would cut down on airflow a fair bit. Now, the filter in the DC14 should be washed, according to Dyson, every 6 months. And in my experience, that's actually fairly accurate. Despite this being an older Cyclone design, it appears to separate finer particles a lot better than some Dysons that are even newer than this, like the DC25. Those ones, the filters tend to get dirty a little bit more quickly than these. Although the Cyclone separation isn't quite as good as the newest Dysons, like the DC41 and newer, as they all have the same cyclone pack, but it's very, very close. And obviously a lot of these filters are going to be deteriorated enough after being washed for so many years at this point, but you should probably replace them, in addition to the post-motor filter, which Dyson claims is a lifetime HEPA filter, but should be replaced about every 5 years. Unfortunately, the way this is designed, you can't really get to this filter until you pry up these plastic tabs, and there is a risk, of course, of those breaking as you remove them from the unit. I recommend using a plastic pry tool to pry them up, and if you do it at just the right angle, you won't break the tabs unless your Dyson's gone brittle. I will do a separate video on how to replace the filter on the DC14, as I still need to do it on this particular unit. But it is something you can do, and I recommend, oh, there's an axolotl. And the axolotl recommends replacing your filter on your DC14 every 5 years. So, whenever you're done washing this 2-piece filter and drying it out, you can in fact put it back in the machine after it dries for 48 hours. Now, as you saw, there are a couple different versions of the genuine Dyson DC14 filters. Now, technically the DC14 filter looks like this. It has this little part in the middle and a little hole, and that's designed so that way whenever you want to remove this from the unit, you can grab this little piece of plastic and remove it that way, because otherwise it can be a little tricky to get out unless you happen to grab the sides of it. Now, the DC15 came out shortly after the DC14 in 2005, and that particular machine had an identical cyclone pack, with the only real difference being that the shroud on it was silver for some reason, and it had a little groove right here that basically would stop you from closing this without a filter in place. Now, the molding marks are still there, but on the 14 it does allow you to shut it without a filter, which is a little annoying, but it's not a big deal, of course, because at least on the bright side that means that you can't lose this entire cyclone pack because of it simply not having a filter. It's just kind of a bit of extra friction that isn't really necessary. But filters on these for aftermarket ones are super cheap, so if you have a DC14, you never replace the filters, replace the filters. It's definitely recommended at this point. Even if you have the newest DC14 that ever existed, that machine is still at least a decade and a half old. So, or at least over a decade old, about a dozen years old. So you want to make sure to change those filters. One thing you're also going to want to check out on these, of course, is the clutch mechanism, because the clutch mechanism and the brush roll are prone to having issues, especially the clutch. The clutch mechanism itself is on the inside of this housing, and there's two belts that run from the motor spindle to the clutch and from the clutch to the brush roll. Now, the belt that goes from the clutch to the brush roll tends to not wear out, which is good because that's the more difficult belt to replace. But a lot of times these clutches need to be rebuilt with that secondary belt, but thankfully that belt is easy to replace. I just realized this isn't on all the way. Is this not on all the way? It looks weird. I just noticed that doesn't look right. Maybe that is right. I actually don't know. Either way. As you can see, sometimes this base plate doesn't like to go on correctly. But, while we're on the topic, the base plate does come off with 3/4 turns of, well, a quarter. Although these do, unfortunately, tend to get chewed up quite a fair bit, which is not exactly ideal. These particular base plates also have wheels that tend to rust out over time, but you can buy replacement sets, and of course you can replace the whole base plate as well. The base plate is pretty much identical on the Dyson DC33, slightly different on the DC07, mainly because of this large debris channel here. Kind of similar to wind tunnel technology, there's a little hole here that allows large debris to get sucked through. And it actually does quite nice. It does make a difference on bare floors, and it does help a little bit on carpets as well, more so on bare floors, as a lot of debris can get sucked up there, and you don't have to worry about it going underneath the brush roll. So that actually is a nice little addition, and it does improve the machine's ability to pick up on bare floors. Now we do have, of course, a lot of hard plastic and some mildly rubbery wheels, although a lot of the rubberiness on these wheels by now are worn down. And we've got hard plastic wheels over here. So this is not an ideal machine for bare floors. There's no real rubber coating on any of the wheels. And that's just not really ideal because you could potentially scratch your floors if they're reasonably delicate. Or, as you can see, the bottom of this can also get scratched up, as people love to drag these along concrete for some reason. You can see the literal concrete pits on the wheels, and that's really annoying. We also have this lower hose, which unfortunately is pretty much what controls the springiness on the head. So a lot of times these hoses will just kind of go limp and not actually hold their shape, and then at that point the cleaner head won't maintain contact. So you got to make sure to check that hose and replace it. There's a lot of maintenance required with this bottom section. The brush rolls tend to wear out, but there are generic replacements available. These bristles will sometimes wear out in a way where they get really sharp, but still mostly hold their shape. These brush rolls also are very prone to hair tangles, but on the bright side, because of their flat design, they are simple enough to cut hair off of. And then we also have, like I mentioned, that secondary belt that frequently fails. And by now, a lot of these clutch assemblies themselves are probably worn out to the point where the entire assembly needs replaced, not just the belts. And the clutch assemblies, unfortunately, are now, as of now, just recently discontinued and no longer available, although there are some places that still have remaining stock being cleared out. So try to rebuild these clutches if you can. Have your local vacuum store put new belts in these clutches, and if your clutch is actually bad, hope and pray that you can find one, because there's not really any aftermarket ones out there that I'm aware of, and the OEM ones are becoming harder and harder to find day by day, which is unfortunate whenever there's a lot of these out there that people do still want to keep running. But Dyson doesn't care. They'd rather you buy a new machine. Although, to be fair, 20 years of support is not exactly something to take for granted in the vacuum industry. We also do have some nice, while we're down here, some nice inspection ports on this. The U-bend, as they call it, pops out, so you can easily check for clogs. And there's also other ductwork on this that allows you to check for clogs very easily. These older Dysons are fantastic for avoiding clogs because there's inspection ports everywhere on the machine. And it makes the whole thing relatively easy to run for someone who's a rudimentary user, because they can pretty much find anything that'd be stuck in it almost anywhere, which is great. Unfortunately, the cleaning performance on this isn't great. As I mentioned, on bare floors, it actually makes a big difference compared to the DC07. That large debris channel means that this actually cleans pretty decently on bare floors. And edge cleaning is pretty good too, because we've got these whiskers built into the sill plate that do actually do a decent job at scooping stuff out of the edges. And that actually is quite nice. However, the brush roll itself, while it does agitate better than surprisingly a good number of machines, and I feel like I talked down the performance of these machines a bit too much. The actual agitation that comes from this brush roll actually is there. It does agitate pretty okay. You can hear the thing agitating the carpet. The problem is that because of the cleaner head design, it still isn't the best at lifting up carpet pile. Now, it's not bad. Like, I just vacuumed this part, and sure, the carpet isn't fluffed up, but it's not matted down either. I've definitely seen worse. So this is definitely far from the worst carpet cleaning machine, and there definitely are worse machines you can use on carpets. However, it is still bested by a basic Walmart Bissell, so you can't really give it any credit in that regard. That being said, it's not the worst. You can definitely do worse than an older Dyson, but don't buy this expecting it to deep clean your carpets, because it's not. For that, you're going to want to upgrade to a newer Dyson, at least a Dyson UP13 or newer. So a Ball Animal 1, Animal 2, Multi-Floor, Total Clean, that kind of thing. Anything that's newer than the DC41 and DC65 platforms, those are going to clean much, much better. Although, to be fair, even the DC41 and DC65 do clean better than this machine, despite what some other people have claimed. The main machines that this cleans better than in the Dyson lineup is the DC25. That is the only full-size upright made by Dyson that actually cleans so poorly that it's rivaled by other poor cleaning machines like a lot of Shark Duo cleans. So, and a lot of Works as well. So this machine doesn't clean well on carpets, but if you have low enough pile carpets, it can get you by. And if you use other machines and this is just in your collection, then you can definitely get by with it, but it shouldn't be your main vacuum if you have only carpets. You will eventually need to use something else to pick up the slack, because this will leave some stuff behind. That being said, it is improved over the DC07. It actually does clean a lot better than DC07. So despite the very similar brush roll design, for whatever reason, maybe because of that debris channel, it cleans better than a DC07, although it's not a huge difference. One of the selling points of this, of course, is the easy way to switch between the carpets and the bare floors. I mentioned both of them, and you got this little dial that you can switch between the two. And of course, when the machine's in the upright position, it always turns off the brush roll. Now, of course, you can use it with your hand, but of course the main selling point is that you can actually use your foot. That's the wrong way. Is that you can actually use your foot to adjust this. So if I've got it down, and yes, I'm wearing shoes, that's the only way I can really have enough strength in my foot to push this up. Now, you don't really want to change it whenever it's down, but when it's upright, you can then use this to switch it up to the bare floor setting. Hopefully that focuses. Or switch it down to the carpet setting. It's a little tricky, but you can get it eventually. Kind of grip it with the back of your foot and pull it up for bare floors, and push it back down for carpets. It is marked right there, of course. Now, sometimes these Dyson's cleaner heads will actually get stuck, and you won't be able to recline them. For example, on mine, if I recline it this way, it reclines just fine. But if I recline it on this side, it gets stuck. And you don't want to force it, because you can break it. If you ever have that issue, your Dyson needs cleaned, as a lot of dirt and stuff can get stuck in this mechanism down here, and that can make it difficult for the actual machine to go down. So sometimes you just got to step on the middle of it, clean out a lot of these cavities right here. So you can see there's like dirt there, dirt there, dirt there along this track. You want to clean all this stuff out and make sure it's squeaky clean, and then at that point you won't have any issues with it sticking up. Sometimes these Dysons will also have issues where this part will get pushed out of the way, and it'll get pushed back like that. And if that happens, it's not going to go upright because that part's in the way. So if that's the case, you're going to want to recline this. You're going to want to take this, push it back up like that, and then now you can put it back in the upright position. Now, in addition to the large debris channel, there's two big improvements that are noticeable from the DC14 when you come from the DC07. The first one that you notice is the noise. Because of the fact that the cyclone pack is actually pointed down and the actual tips of the cyclones are pointed down, that muffles the sound of the cyclone pack a lot more. On the Dyson DC07, the cyclones are pointed up, and especially on specific models where they were cut off at a certain point, the DC07s were very loud and have a very loud rushing whirring noise coming from the cyclone pack. The DC14 thankfully does not have that problem. And the cyclone setup on the DC14 is so much better. Not only is it smaller, which allows the weight to be balanced a bit more, not only does it make the machine quieter because there's no noise coming from the cyclones, but the entire cyclone pack is so much easier to disassemble and clean than the DC07. And there's a lot less weird things you have to worry about lining back up, which makes it so much better, just in every way. One of the other big things is the telescope reach wand. Instead of the reversible wand in the DC07, the DC14 instead has telescope reach, where the handle always stays in the same position, but the wand inside of it slides up and down for ease of use. You flip up the wand cap and pull the wand out until it clicks into place. Now you press the wand release button, and now you have the telescope reach wand. You can grab the wand right there, and that allows you to use the wand and reach up into places, all that usual stuff. The actual handle is a bit less comfortable than on the DC07 because you're holding a U shape, and that lip can get a little tiring after a while. This was fixed on some of the later models, but it still is a decent improvement over the DC07 whenever you're actually going up high. However, when you're going down low, it's a lot more awkward because you don't have the handle that's right here. When you're trying to use the low reach floor tool or something like that, it's a lot more awkward trying to push it and pull it on bare floors. But it's a little bit of a trade-off that I'm willing to do. Now, if you want to use the hose on the DC14, after you do that, you press these two buttons on either side of the wand. You press those, and that allows you to pull the hose straight out, assuming you actually correctly press both buttons at the same time, which is a little tricky to do with one hand. And there is our hose. And now we can put all of our attachments on the end of the hose. And regardless of whether the hose or wand are attached, the best thing about every Dyson that pretty much everyone loves so much, rightfully so, is how crazy long the hose is. It's a 17 feet hose, so going upstairs, cleaning up high and all that stuff is better than any other upright, or any upright that isn't a Dyson. For some reason, no other vacuum company really does that. A lot of companies now are trying to push the lift away theory, but it simply doesn't work nearly as well. This allows you to leave the machine at the bottom of the stairs or the bottom of whatever you're cleaning, and because the hose is mounted at the bottom of the machine, unlike the Sharks and the Sevo Dart, it never tips over, so you don't have to worry about that. Whenever you put this back in, you actually press the button a little bit harder to where it clicks all the way in. There's actually a second click, and now you can slide the wand down into the handle, flip down the wand cap, and you're golden. Now, all the Dyson attachments that ride on board use a standard 1¼ inch fitting, which means that you can use any 1¼ inch attachments on the end of the wand, but you will need a spacer to use them on the hose because of the way it fits, much in a similar vein to a Hoover wind tunnel. We've got our dusting brush, which has a swiveling neck. We've got our upholstery tool, which has lint pickers, well, I guess they're more so velvet strips, and also a swiveling neck with a little bit of bleed off. Both of these tools are identical to the DC07 and in some ways similar to the DC04. And we have a crevice tool, which was reused on the DC17 and actually has a bend design which allows it to fit on the machine in the way that it does. And instead of having multiple holes, it has one large hole on the side to vent suction, just to increase a bit of airflow. Now, a lot of people don't like this crevice tool, but I actually do quite enjoy it. Unfortunately, it's difficult to find replacements of these nowadays because Dyson no longer makes them, and for some reason no aftermarket company is making them actually in the correct shape. So you may find replacements that fit on the wand, but don't fit actually on the machine. Also, this clip can sometimes break, but usually that's pretty decent. But I actually find myself really liking this crevice tool, and it's kind of nice being able to get into a corner in the way that it does. So I'm particularly fond of it, and clearly Dyson was too, because they reused it on the DC17. Dyson does also make adapters that allow their newer attachments to fit on their older platforms. So you're not actually shut out from the newer Dyson ecosystem. All the new Dyson attachments like the Groom tool and the Tangle-free turbine, all of that stuff are still compatible with the DC14 with an inexpensive adapter that you can buy direct from Dyson. And of course there are aftermarket ones available as well. So you're not limited to older Dyson attachments, even if some of the older Dyson attachments are in fact fantastic, like this turbo tool made by Wesselwerk. It works very good, although the one that would have came with the DC14 Animal is a little bit different. That one's a bit worse. And I do have one, but I can't find it right now. But I'll do a separate video on all the Dyson attachments I have. So beyond that, and the 30-foot cord, there isn't much else to say about this. I know, 25 minutes, 26 minutes for me is a relatively short review. But at the same time, the DC14 is legitimately one of my favorite vacuums, even though objectively speaking, it is a lot worse than the newer Dysons. As the plastics have issues with going brittle, the cleaning performance is worse than newer machines, and the metal wand, while we do like its structural rigidity compared to the newer Dysons, is a lot more bulky and more difficult to use than a straightforward stick. So, that being said, the DC14 is plentiful on the used market, so if you are after one of these, you can find one and rebuild them pretty inexpensively. But replacing that clutch is not for the faint of heart, and parts are getting more, excuse me as I have the hiccups, parts are getting more and more hard to find as the days go on. Filters are still plentiful. Some replacement parts like hoses and attachments, even if they're third party, are still available. Brush rolls you can still find, both third party and genuine. And the clutches themselves, you can find genuine ones, or you can find third party belts all over the place to rebuild clutches with. A lot of extraneous parts though, like unfortunately that filter clip that I just broke, are very difficult to find. Oh, that sucks. I'm so sad about that. At least I caught that on camera, though. My reaction was probably pretty funny, although I haven't watched this video back yet. But anyways, the DC14 is, to me, an excellent machine, but of course, objectively, it's not. But it's very nostalgic, and the thing about these older Dysons is even if they're not great for cleaning performance, they're so nice to use. Even though this doesn't have a swivel neck, the way it's designed, it just maneuvers and glides effortlessly. Despite this machine weighing probably about 17, 18 pounds, I actually don't remember how much these weigh, it glides effortlessly, and you can push and pull it, and despite it being a full-size vacuum, just the weight is balanced so well that you just don't really feel any issues using it. Of course, again, that lower hose is something to worry about, but if the thing is fully tuned up, then it's a breeze to use. I guess that was a dirt double pun. But yeah, the DC14 is one of my favorite machines, and I'm debating on doing a separate review for the two other colorways that I have, but maybe there's no point. It is just a color and attachments that are different after all. But, you know, there's some interesting little quirks of the machine as well. Now, fun fact, when it comes to quirks, there is also a version of the DC14 that has the handle of the Dyson DC17. Basically, it looks identical to the handle on the DC17 where it faces backwards. The only difference is it doesn't have the extra grip, and it has, of course, the button release from the DC14. Now, back whenever I first had my own first DC14, which was the full kit, it had that handle. And at the time, those handles were still on the market, so it was all you ever really found. Nowadays, those handles are really difficult to find, and I only ever see the main DC14 handle. And those handles were never put out in the UK, only here in the US. It was kind of a strange little thing. Maybe it was like a weird parts issue, I don't know. And the DC15 has even 3 handles. And also, by the way, I've had to distinguish this myth multiple times. The DC15 does not use the same attachment fitting as the other Dysons. The DC07, DC14, DC17, and DC18 all use an 1.25 inch fitting. The DC15 does not. The attachments are not interchangeable, and they do not work. So you cannot buy DC14 attachments and use them on a DC15, or vice versa, at least not without some kind of adapter. In fact, the DC15 does in fact natively fit the newer Dyson attachments, simply without using the latch. So very similar to a DC25, just without the locking mechanism. So that's a fun little fact. But yeah, the DC14, it's interesting. And yeah, so probably not much else to say, so we'll just use it real quick and then end this video. One other little fun fact that I always forget is because of the way they designed the cleaner head, even though there's no official cord hook on the DC14, the way the cleaner head's designed, it does a great job at pushing the cord out of the way instead of running over it like other vacuums. Which makes me wonder how the heck the previous owner managed to do this to the cord. But the cords and switches and stuff like that are thankfully very easy to replace. In fact, my first ever DC14, I did a video on that animal from many years ago. I fixed it by putting a new switch in it, and now I have to do the same to my DC25. So that's interesting. Anyways, let me know your thoughts on the DC14 in the comments below. A very special machine, celebrating 2 anniversaries. The 6-year anniversary of my first ever vacuum review, even if that was 2 months ago, in addition to that at this point. And also the 20-year anniversary of this machine existing. So 20 years later, it's still successful, I would say. I mean, this thing ran all the way up until 2010 before being discontinued in favor of the DC33, and you still could find refurbishment runs of these as late as like 2014, 2015, from sites like Overstock and Moot and stuff like that. So there's a lot of these out there. You know, that's almost a decade of it being on the market. And of course the DC07, you know, ran for almost just as long. Well, almost that year, but it also had a 3-year head start. So, you know, it ran for even longer. So, yeah, let me know your thoughts on the DC14 in the comments below. I'd love to know. It's very interesting. Hi.